Well, welcome back again this week to an analysis behind the news. You know, sometimes I get criticized for talking about old stuff. In fact, one person remarked that nobody this side of 45 would be interested in what I have to say on certain things. The reason that I look at old stuff is for two reasons. Number one is to demonstrate that what has been going on for a long, long time. It's not really new. Another reason is to be able to go back and check the background of something to see if there isn't a clue there as to what's happening today relative to tactics, strategy, that sort of thing. For instance, one of the books that is very vital to understanding what's been going on over the last 20 years is New Lies for Old by Anatoly Golitsyn. Now, he was a man who at one point was a KGB operative within the planning department. He came out of Russia before the so-called death of communism to expose the fact that the Russians were planning a new strategy of liberalization. In other words, they were going to make it appear as if communism was dead, that perhaps even the wall would come down in Berlin and all of that, as part of a master strategy to put the American people to sleep, and with the American people, certain areas of the American government, so that they could produce or promote communism all over the world under a new banner. Because after all, communism was dead. We don't have to worry about it anymore. We won't pay attention to all the new leaders in the democratic countries of Central Europe and Eastern Europe that are now run by ex-communists, such as Merkel of Germany and others of that nature. And that they would slowly but surely gather steam behind the scenes under the guise of being Democrat. Well, one of the things that he points out in his book, New Lies for Old, is this very interesting sentence. He says, and this is the strategy of the communists back in the in fact, he wrote this book, by the way, I should tell you that. He wrote this book in '84, published in '85, 5 years before the wall came down, when he speculated that might happen as part of the liberalization policy of putting the death knell on communism on the surface and preparing for the strategy. The other thing he said was traditional conservatives would be isolated and driven towards extremism. In other words, the communists would drive the traditional conservatives into a point where they would look extremist and become isolated from the mainstream. And in that regard, I really wonder about what is going on, for instance, with the Snowden revelations. Snowden, the man that came out of the NSA, who has revealed a number of things, a whistleblower, if you will. But there's a very interesting aspect of this guy Snowden. Two things, actually. Number one, he has not revealed anything we didn't already know. There are already whistleblowers that came out of the NSA and other intelligence agencies that told us all of these things that Snowden revealed months, years ago. So why all of a sudden this guy Snowden rises to the surface and becomes the cause célèbre of the conservative, libertarian, and even ultra-liberal world? You have to also look at the background of Snowden. If you take a look at where this man came from, didn't finish high school, got his GED, he became a guard, he went in the Army, broke both legs, came out. He became a guard at the CIA and then a security guard at the NSA, and somehow he gets elevated continually within the NSA, knowing more and more intelligence data. You know, there's a saying we have around here. Does it stand up to the smell test? I think we have to be very cautious about whether we condemn or praise Snowden. That being said, we know that there are a lot of things in the American intelligence community that is not good. They're spying on Americans. There are other things I could digress about, and confirm this across the whole spectrum of American governmental society today. So we understand that. We have understood this for years, decades in the John Birch Society. But why Snowden after so many others have come out and been whistleblowers? Well, for one thing, perhaps if it hadn't been for the Associated Press and the Fox incidences where the government has been spying on newspaper and media reporters and that sort of thing, maybe Snowden might have been ignored this time, as all other previous whistleblowers had been ignored by the national controlled media. Perhaps not. But it is very interesting, don't you think, that he flees the country after the revelations come out that he somehow was a Ron Paul supporter, voted for him. How do you know that? If they know how a guy voted, then you don't have the secret ballot, do you? Okay, so he gave money to the Ron Paul campaign. But isn't it rather convenient that he flees to Hong Kong on the doorstep of communist China and proclaims that they have freedom when the Chinese communists do have a certain amount of control there? They've been reluctant to allow it to become complete because Hong Kong remains a gateway, if you will, into China of a lot of money and everything else, and they don't want to put a stop to that. And yet we now see that he's even going further. He's fled to Moscow now. Now, things have changed this morning, so we don't have the latest word. He was supposed to get on a plane today for Cuba out of Moscow, from there to Venezuela and into Ecuador. Well, apparently he didn't make the plane to Cuba this morning for whatever reason. I don't know what it is. So we'll see how that's going to pan out. But it's interesting he wants to end up in Ecuador, which is run by a communist. It's a communist country. So we're going from Hong Kong, a gateway of a communist country, to Moscow, which is a communist country, I don't care what you say, to Cuba, to Venezuela, to Ecuador. All these are communist countries. Is that perhaps a clue as to what's going on? Now, there are those who will say, well, he can't flee to countries that are friendly to the United States because they'll give him up and send him back here. Well, there's a certain amount of truth to that argument. But for me, there's no way I would flee to a communist country if I was in trouble with the federal government. No way. Well, there's a lot of reasons why you can probably gather why I wouldn't do it, but nonetheless, and something that we reported on quite recently and reiterate that Ecuador, once Carrera was reelected the president of Ecuador, he got the legislature of Ecuador to pass a law regulating the news media. Well, you know and I know that communists regulate the news media. But in this case, they're even codifying it. They're even putting it into law. And by the way, Russia said it has no authority to extricate or extradite Snowden back to the United States. What do you mean authority? Since when has the Russian police or authorities ever dreamt of whether or not they have the authority to do something or not, if they want to do it, at any rate? Enough of that. All I'm saying and the point I'm making is let's take a little bit more, let's see where the chips fall on this thing, whether we praise or condemn Snowden for what he did. What some of the revelations were, we already knew. We've been attacking these things for years. In fact, I've been criticized lately because I quoted an NSA head in one of my recent broadcasts. But that's when the NSA was a good outfit 30, 40 years ago. In fact, the individual that I quoted, the former head of the NSA, used to work with Congressman Larry McDonald in Western goals in exposing terrorism around the world. Be that as it may. Things must be getting very, very bad if the New York Times is starting to talk about sexual assaults in the Army by homosexuals on other men. It says here that the Pentagon estimated that 26,000 service members experienced unwanted sexual contact in 2012. Of these cases, the Pentagon says 53% involved attacks on men, mostly by other men. So attacks by homosexuals within our military, now that we've opened it up, have become a serious problem. You know, it used to be that we talk about you don't want to put women in combat because how are you going to share the same foxhole between a man and a woman? Now you've got this problem. It'll get worse if we continue. Interestingly enough, the way they manipulate things in the news, here's the Wall Street Journal for Monday, for June 24th, and it shows rallies for and against gay marriage, okay? Now, at the top one here, it shows the individuals who are for gay marriage. They look halfway decent. They're nice young folks. You get warm fuzzies looking at these people if you didn't realize what they stood for. In contrast, the individual that they show who is against gay marriage is a guy who's wearing, and I'm not sure what it is, it's either the Chinese or North Korean Communist Army hat. This is the guy they show as being the conservative. So basically what we're saying is that the way the media builds their cases on a lot of these things, you're not really sure up front where they're going. Let's give it a little time to see what shakes out of whether it's the Snowden incident or whether the deliberate things of making the conservatives look like they're communists when they support or when they're against gay marriage. At any rate, until next week, we'll see you then.